Do you understand why I love this movie so much?
No.
For Sav Rodgers, a queer kid growing up in Kansas, role models came from an unexpected source.
When I was 12, I had a movie where the gay and lesbian characters were good and funny and out. They were able to live as their authentic selves.
Chasing Amy.
Chasing Amy.
Chasing Amy.
The third film from director Kevin Smith.
It's about a guy who falls in love with a lesbian.
But Sav's about to find out. Life's not about finding your heroes.
Welcome to the house that Amy built.
It's about finding yourself.
I'm directing a project about the legacy of Chasing Amy as an LGBTQ film. Do you find the film to be authentic to the LGBTQ community?
I find it authentic to the straight dude who falls for a queer woman community.
No longer being a lesbian by meeting the right man.
That's gonna be controversial.
Ben Affleck's goatee was a bad idea.
Let's go into the movie.
Something that's problematic can still mean a lot in your development.
It was brave to portray somebody fluid.
Seeing that movie helped me figure out, oh, that's me.
That's gay.
This girl loves me.
It's cool to come to a place where a bunch of stuff changed your life. All right, let's go. That's where they have their big fight.
Well, we're purifying it with our butts.
You were so supportive, and I was so alone in the world.
How wonderful that you found something in it.
The movie is amazing, but whatever moved you, there's a dark side too.
I can't erase the past.
You don't just get a pass for that.
I didn't know what I expected. I did not expect all this.
Maybe what's really troubling you is that your fragile fantasy might not be true.
Can we tap? This movie made me be honest with myself. Chasing Amy and chasing Amy. My butt has been where Ben Affleck's butt has been. Basically Ben Affleck. A little shorter.
Chasing Amy could never love me back the way that I loved it, but as a result of loving it, I found community, I found purpose, I found connection, I found love. A beautiful thing. Fandom can be a jumping off point for something greater in our lives, but it's okay for that relationship to fandom to change.
I'm Erin Trommater.
I'm Erin Brown.
And I'm Sav Rodgers.
This is World Cinema History.
Everyone has a piece of art that has moved them, even changed them in some deep and irreversible way. That's the nature of art. Every piece has the potential to connect to someone. A song, a book, a painting, a film. It has meaning to someone out there. For me, besides learning the concept of militant decency from Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, the most life-changing piece was a monologue in Arthur Miller's All My Sons. One year, I simply took off. I went to New Orleans. For 2 months, I lived on bananas and milk, and I studied a certain disease. And then she came, and she cried, and I went back home with her. And now I live in the usual darkness. I can't find myself. It's hard sometimes to remember the kind of man I wanted to be. I'm a good husband. Chris is a good son. He'll come back. Up to that point, I'd been living the life I was expected to live. And when I heard that monologue, I realized all I was doing with my life was waiting to die. I made some major changes, and now I'm living on my own terms. For our guest today, that art was the 1997 film Chasing Amy. He gave a TED Talk explaining how, growing up as a queer kid in Middle America, that movie saved his life. The TED Talk made its way to director Kevin Smith and ultimately resulted in the film we're discussing today, Chasing Amy. It is my great pleasure to introduce our guest on the podcast today, filmmaker Sav Rodgers.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Erin. That was a lovely introduction. The TED Talk came about by complete accident. So just to paint a picture for your listeners, as a closeted queer kid in suburban Kansas, I didn't have a lot of references to the outside world. I think I had a pretty sheltered upbringing. I was pretty lonely growing up. And so film and TV were, my gateways to the outside world. And so as a kid, I just watched as much, film and TV as I could. And that was my reference point for the outside world. And after going to the University of Kansas Film School, I had learned a lot of life skills that I desperately needed. I credit a lot to my time at KU. While attending KU, I'd found a lot of opportunities to connect with the outside world through artist fellowships, residencies, grants. These were opportunities to get me elsewhere. After graduating college, I was searching for more opportunities to connect with that outside world. And so while I was sitting in an artist residency in Kansas City in my studio and procrastinating on writing a script, I got this really persistent Facebook ad for this thing called the TED residency. I just kept ignoring it. Frankly, I kept ignoring it. I found out that it was free to apply to, which was wonderful. And I thought, well, even though I don't have an idea for a TED Talk, it seems free to apply to, and they want young people to apply because this opportunity was through something called Adobe Project 1324. And through that, I basically just submitted an idea for talking about LGBTQ representation. It was not a real idea for a TED Talk, but somehow that got me to be a finalist because, again, Adobe was looking for young people to participate in this residency. To my shock, I became a finalist because I was like, they must not have very many competitive people in here. But what happened was that I got a 30-minute conversation with the curators at TED who ran this program. And we just had a conversation. And I had already been thinking about a documentary on Chasing Amy for a while because of my experiences growing up in Kansas, but also the dissonance as I was growing up between this film that saved my life, but that was also problematic to some people. And to be more precise about the term problematic, there were lesbians who deemed it lesbophobic. Some people called it biphobic. And it was really a genuine shock to me to hear about how the LGBTQ community responded to the film versus my own experience where it literally saved my life at a time where I was 12 years old and dealing with a lot of suicidal ideation. So because I had this documentary pitch prepared, I was really prepared for that conversation with TED where they said, look, we really like you, but you don't seem to have an idea for a TED Talk. So if you had to give one tomorrow, what would it be about? And I told them about my experience with Chasing Amy and how it radically changed and saved my life. And they were silent for a beat. And they said, wow, that is the most narrow, specific idea for a TED Talk we've ever heard. We'll let you know in 3 weeks. And 3 days later, I found out that I was moving to New York to live outside of Kansas as an adult for the first time, to start making Chasing Amy, and to give this TED Talk. It felt like something out of a fairy tale in some ways, but that was the thing that really set the rest of my adult life into motion. I gave it in December 2018. And it went online in April of 2019. In those, what felt like arduous months of waiting, I just continued to work on the documentary. I'd shot my first 2 days. I raised my first couple thousand to start shooting the documentary. And in that time, I was letting everybody and their mother know that I had a TED Talk that was going to come out that was talking about Chasing Amy and related to this documentary project. So by the time that it went live on April 30th, 2019, even though it was not a featured TED Talk, and a featured TED Talk means that they put it on their front page and they blast it out to millions of people. And my TED Talk was not selected for that, much to my disappointment, but it is what it is. But despite the fact that it was not a featured TED Talk, enough people had sent it to Kevin on Twitter and other means within an hour of it being online. He responded within that first hour of it being online. And so Kevin had responded publicly to it, and I was so overwhelmed. That was a day where we were driving to Las Vegas from Los Angeles to see my parents. Riley was looking at all the tweets rolling in the passenger seat as I was driving down there, and I just decided, okay, I'm going to take a beat to see how this all makes me feel, which was overwhelmed. And I waited until the next day to reach out to Kevin's representation. The next morning, I called his reps at WME. I said, hey, this is weird, but your client, Kevin Smith, said on Twitter that he would be in my documentary. I can send along some links to prove that I'm not just some weirdo calling in. After that, I guess Kevin had caught wind of the fact that I called his reps. He DM'd me directly on Twitter, gave me his number, and said to text him because he had something that was time sensitive that would be fresh for the documentary. I sent him a text. He called me as I walked along the casino floor at the Hard Rock Casino. Rest in peace, Hard Rock Casino. We had a 20-minute phone conversation where he talked about how much the TED Talk meant to him. You know, he asked me questions like if he should have used the word bisexual in Chasing Amy. He, excitedly talked about different types of interviews that we could do for the documentary, and it really set into motion everything that would come later in the documentary. That was how Kevin first responded to the TED Talk. How did I get a lot of our interviews for Chasing Amy? It was a really interesting time because I was a filmmaker who nobody had heard of. It was my first feature documentary, so it was not an easy sell to get people to say yes to me just based off talking to their representation. So normally you would go through the traditional routes to reach out to somebody's reps. But almost every single person that we got for Chasing Amy was somebody who I had personally connected with, or, somebody was willing to vouch for me to these people. And so in the case of Guinevere Turner, I had two separate people vouch for me to Guinevere. So Guinevere was actually the first person to say yes to being interviewed for Chasing Amy through email. This was prior to me moving to New York for TED. A mentor from my university days reached out to the head of her MFA program who knew Guinevere, and Guinevere said yes over email. However, emails tend to get lost in the shuffle, and a lot had changed between that first time emailing and everything that had come to pass after TED and the TED Talk. And so after the TED residency, I moved to Los Angeles for something called the Outset Fellowship. And the Outset Fellowship was a young filmmakers fellowship for filmmakers 16 to 24 in Los Angeles through the Outfest Film Festival. And so I moved to LA and had my first group of all queer friends as an adult through this fellowship. And through that, a mentor / friend named Shaz Bennett, I was able to reconnect with her after meeting with her on the film festival circuit. Our films had been paired together at the Tallgrass Film Festival in 2017. Her brilliant film, Alaska is a Drag, and then a short film that I had made. After meeting with Shaz and reconnecting in Los Angeles, we were at Outfest opening night 2019, and Guinevere was there, and Shaz offered to connect us in person. And so Shaz marched me up to Guinevere. She gave me a very warm introduction, and Guinevere later told me that was the reason that she agreed to do the documentary, was because Shaz had vouched for me. And Guinevere gave such a wonderful interview for the documentary that was very honest and transparent that I'm always grateful to Shaz for facilitating that introduction. I read her book When the World Didn't End, and if you haven't read it, highly recommend it. It's a deeply harrowing book that I have immense respect for her and her experiences. I mean, for most people, writing American Psycho would be enough, or making Go Fish would be enough, and she has lived many, many lives in their brief time on Earth. Yeah, I mean, Guinevere, we were laughing about the documentary form and the artifice of documentaries as a whole. And we were laughing about the artifice of the edits, of like moments that are used to seem more serious than perhaps they are. And so upon asking Guinevere for a title in her introduction, she offered a lot of things that she is beyond the context of who she is to Chasing Amy, which was very fun. And then the idea for that visual gag where we, keep expanding the talking head and showing all of the things that she is, that actually came from a note session with one of our associate producers, Ryan James. He was very helpful and cogent at a time where I felt like I was out of gas as a director. The process of editing Chasing Amy was very difficult for me on a personal level for a number of reasons, including the fact that we watched me transition throughout the process of it, which was very difficult to do, to, reconcile the person who I thought I had always been with the person that people had seen on the outside. Additionally, it was very challenging to watch myself come of age and watch myself make mistakes. especially for a person who did not want to be in the documentary at all at the outset, let alone nearly as much as I was by the end, becoming the primary participants, the protagonist of the film. And so Ryan, he was like, "Hey man, like, he offered these insights that in this really encouraging way, helped me reconnect with what I loved about the artifice of the documentary art form." And he's like, "Oh, I think on your best day, you would suggest a joke like this." Ryan was very generous in that note session, and it helped breathe a second life into the film. So always shout out your collaborators in these interviews, right? But yeah, that's where the idea for that fun, lower third came from. The Joey interview was an infinitely humbling experience. From the outset, I will say the Joey interview is a prime example of how archives are biased towards the people who fill those archives. As somebody who had researched Chasing Amy in some capacity for the better part of 10 years, working with a great archival producer, working with a team of really smart filmmakers, what's available to you from that period of time is based off of what exists in the archive. And for a lot of that is PR, promoting a film, or firsthand experiences from the people who talk about their experiences on the film, which in some way ends up being a form of public relations of some kind. And so all of my research had pointed me in the direction that everybody had a great time making Chasing Amy until otherwise stated. And so when I walked into the Joey interview, I was operating from that same belief because I'd had all this evidence that kind of confirmed that belief in some ways. Well, I feel like I could not have been more prepared for that Joey interview when you have somebody who is, breaking new information to you, especially harrowing information about their firsthand experience on something in that way. It is bound to catch you off guard. And I was certainly caught off guard by the revelations and the wisdom that Joey imparted in that interview. People ask me how it felt in that moment. And I always say it's written all over my face. What you see is what you get there as it pertains to my experience. But my experience is not nearly as important as Joey's is there. It was infinitely humbling. It showed me in my life that no matter how prepared I think I am, there's always more learning. There's always more growing, that there's a time to talk and there's a time to listen. And that was a time to listen. And so when we got to the edit of the documentary, the first thing that I had told our editor, Sharika, was that the entire movie had to be based around building up to this moment, and then anything that happens after has to be the result of growth that had happened after that moment, if the film was really going to be about my story. And so there was a lot of painstaking editing to make sure that we were representing that conversation as fairly as possible, and that everything felt like it was leading up to that moment. Some people have called it a gut punch, and that is very purposeful. You are going through the journey of a young person whose dreams have kind of come true in some sense. And then there's this moment that's very much a reality check of like, well, what is important here? And the most important thing there is to hear what Joey has to say in no uncertain terms. And so I'm very thankful that Joey opted to tell us her truth that day. It, not only changed the direction of the movie, sure, but it changed my life. And that's what we try to show in the third act of the movie, is that there are more important things than making a movie. And so there were a lot of things that I needed to deal with as a human being that I went home to Kansas to deal with. I'm thankful that you said that it shows, no ego. I think, Eric, that when you have an experience like that, it's a very revealing moment of who you are. And what I wanted to demonstrate was that I had really heard Joey more than anything. So I appreciate your kind words there. And I hope that it's apparent to other viewers as well how much that moment affected my life for the better. What you're seeing in Chasing Amy is that I'm having a series of extremely vulnerable conversations with people who I have admired my whole life. And it was through that process that really forced me to reconcile with truths deep within myself. I had known I was trans since 2015, but the world continued to feel extremely unsafe for trans people. And as we're having this conversation in 2025, the world is continuing to reinforce how deeply unsafe it is for trans people and the hostilities that exist. However, what you saw on screen contributed immensely to being able to feel like I could be myself in public. I had this conversation with Kevin on screen, and it made me feel like somebody who I admired, and who made a film that made a big difference in my life. If he could understand the fact that I was trans, then maybe other people could too. And so I was able to take the step to come out publicly and not just, be out to Riley and my family. By going through this process, I was forever emotionally altered by the process of making this documentary. And I don't know where I would be in my journey without making Chasing Amy, because I really never thought I would be able to come out publicly. At 24, which sounds silly, but it sounds silly now, but I felt like it was too late. I had already given this TED Talk. I already had some modicum of a public stage, and I was afraid of asking people to refer to me in a way that would actually make me happy, because I was afraid of the conversations I would have to have. I, feared retribution or violence. I was no stranger to people making transphobic threats at me. I was scared. But this movie made me feel, in the process of making it, and that rapport with Kevin at that time made me feel safe to be able to come out and to be myself. And so by the time that I'm talking to Joey, I'd already come out as trans publicly. By the time that we're seeing the rest of the movie, you're seeing me start to take steps to get to become myself fully. And that emotional journey I think is at the bedrock of it, though. I think some people think that being trans is all about the medical care that you can receive, and that is a, important thing for many trans people, most trans people who, choose to medically transition in some ways. But I wanted to demonstrate in Chasing Amy that the process of becoming oneself is a lifelong endeavor, and that this was a part of it, and a big part of it for me, but not the only part of it. I've been really fortunate to meet a lot of trans youth through the process of touring Chasing Amy around the world. I've been fortunate to meet them, their parents, people who care about them, people who love them. And it is a reminder to me that there will always be people who fight for what is good and what is just. I know parents of trans kids who have uprooted their lives from red states where they're trying to outlaw gender affirming care for kids to blue states where these fundamental healthcare rights are protected. I've met so many people along this journey, and I think the biggest thing that I would say to trans kids right now are that there are people who are fighting for you. There are people who are doing their best to provide a world that is safe for you, despite things out of their control, like what is happening in the federal government, what's happening in the executive branch when cowardly politicians cave because they don't seem to understand how fascism works, that you don't actually cater to moderate voters by giving away people's rights. The thing I would say to trans youth is there are good people who are fighting for you. There are filmmakers who are making art that can provide comfort. There are people who are creating historical documents of the fights that we are having now to show that who you are is not this outrageous thing, that there's precedent for who you are. And even if there wasn't, they would be fighting for you. While I can't offer a pithy monologue about it, how it gets better, what I will say is that there is a world where you will get to be yourself, and that it won't be so hard. But we have to fight for that world, because there are people who are actively trying to take that away. And every trans person I know is concerned about who is coming up behind them. And so we will continue to fight for you, and we have a lot of allies. The other thing I will say is that the past 100 years of cinema, save for the last 5 years, there has been this expectation modeled in the mainstream that loving trans people is somehow exceptional, that to be accepted is a radical act versus something that should be standard. Vito Russo had this quote in The Celluloid Closet that I'm going to paraphrase right now. The movies taught straight people how to feel about gay people and gay people how to feel about themselves. The same thing can be applied to trans people. The movies may have taught you how to feel about yourself, but I want to dare you to imagine a world in which you come out and you are accepted. To imagine a world where you come out and you are loved, and that it is not an exceptional thing. And if you struggle to find movies that depict this, well, if you're a young trans boy who is a romantic like I am and I was, at age 12, there is a movie out there in Chasing Amy that shows that you can be loved and it is not exceptional, but it can really be beautiful. I will say from the outset that any parallels between my love story with Riley and Chasing Amy were purely accidental in the way that, a lesbian ends up with a man. I was not out to prove a thesis with Chasing Amy in that way. But what is intentional in the documentary, and I worked very hard on this with our editor, Sharika Ajay Kumar, who's brilliant and amazing, is that there are 4 parallel love stories in Chasing Amy that are explored. The first is Scott Mosier and Guinevere Turner's romantic friendship that helped inspire Kevin to write Chasing Amy. The second is the real relationship between Kevin Smith and Joey Lauren Adams that largely inspired Chasing Amy. The third is the fictional relationship between Holden McNeil and Alyssa Jones within the film Chasing Amy. And the last is my relationship with my wife, Riley, which is the only relationship that works out in the way that people think relationships should work out, right? Where we're still together, everything's hunky-dory and happy. We are showing, as I'm coming of age against the backdrop of Chasing Amy, ways in which I have learned to examine love, the lessons that I have taken away from Chasing Amy as my relationship with Riley grows, but also that in the journey to find oneself, you can find love. And that love can be very real and sweet and tender, all the things that you can hope that it would be. Well, thank you for asking about the Transgender Film Center. The Transgender Film Center is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that we founded back in 2020 to support trans-made stories being connected with audiences around the world. We started with a small little micro grant in the form of the Trailblazer Grant, and we've been able to expand because in 2024 we gave out $100,000 in artist support to trans creators. What we want is to support trans artists and filmmakers to be able to tell their stories. I remember as I was coming up and trying to come out, that, I felt like there was no institution that would really have my back as a storyteller. And so with 4 other wonderful volunteer board members, we founded an organization that, I think can make a real difference in the world. And right now we're on track to give a whole hell of a lot more than $100,000 in 2025 if we do everything right. I'm really excited to continue, supporting that work and administering those funds. And so, it's not because I aspired to be an arts nonprofit administrator, but it's because, the trans community needs something like that. And we're not the only organization trying to benefit the trans film community, but we're a small drop in the bucket. And so if people want to go support the Transgender Film Center, then go to transfilmcenter.org and make a donation, because that all makes a difference and goes right into supporting trans filmmakers. If people want to watch Chasing Amy, there are a lot of wonderful ways to watch this movie. The way that I would encourage is to watch it through Canopy or Hoopla. If you are a student or you have a library card, those are 2 ways to watch Chasing Amy for free that still gets our filmmaking team paid. So you can go to chasingamydoc.com and see all the places that you can watch Chasing Amy. But otherwise, Canopy or Hoopla is always the way that I would encourage. There's also this thing called the Queer Liberation Library that is compatible with Canopy, so you can just get a free library card through the Queer Liberation Library online, and it'll give you access to Canopy. There are other ways to obtain library cards that are compatible with Canopy or Hoopla, should you be interested.
Yeah, it's a lot less work than moving. Thank you, Sav. You just probably saved all 6 people who listen to us in New York from moving. What do you think the future of queer cinema is?
Well, it's interesting. I think to look at the future of queer cinema, we can also look at the past here. You look at like the late 80s and early 90s kind of giving birth to the, what we call the new queer cinema movement, how basically there was not a system that was interested in supporting the voices of queer filmmakers, right? And so you have this incredible independent film movement that happens as a result, and these people are angry and they have every right to be. You look at the films of Gregor Rocky, you look at the films of Alison Anders, Todd Haynes, Guinevere Turner, Rose Trochet. You look at these films that are really given a platform through independent cinema, and the curators who were supporting these filmmakers at places like Sundance, Berlinale, etc. Right? You have as a result, a lot of like transgressive films that are able to find an audience. And we look at what's happening in independent film today, where, it's not that there's a lack of queer talent out there. What there is a lack of is meaningful pathways to distribution through traditional means. Around 2020, with the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, the streaming bubble burst. Acquisitions departments at a lot of these streamers started to shut down. So in 2023, fast forward to the writer's strike, and a lot of these pipelines for acquisitions have completely shut down, where studios, networks, streamers, they have decided that they are no longer acquiring much of anything. The example that I always use in polite company is the 2023 Sundance Grand Jury Prize winner Going to Mars, the Nikki Giovanni story. And even that took 8 months to publicly announce a deal with HBO Documentaries as an acquisition. Typically, if you win Sundance, you get kind of a little bit more of a choice selection as a documentarian, right? What is happening now is that streamers, studios, networks, nobody's buying independent films in the way that they used to. But that doesn't mean that independent films are not still popular. Look at the success of The People's Joker is what I always point to, right? But you can even look at Chasing Amy as a documentary. We played at 78 film festivals in 12 countries around the world, some of which I didn't even know you could play queer films in. We played in Hong Kong, we played in Mumbai, we played in Nepal, we played in, Amsterdam, which I knew you could play queer films in.
You won an award in
played
Cleveland. As somebody who grew up in Michigan,
exactly.
I would rather be in Mumbai as a queer individual.
And we were able to show Chasing Amy as there was yet another attack on trans youth in the state legislature, something that we talked about in our talk back that night. What we were able to do is to build an audience of people who are passionate about connecting to your film. And so, but we're going to use The People's Joker as the example because it is a film that, has blown people away from its premiere at TIFF 2022 all the way through its physical media release, where people are just really excited about that film. It was nominated for the Cassavetes Award at the Independent Spirit Awards. And it's not like there was a studio clamoring to buy that movie, but they were able to connect with their audience. That is a transgressive film that is really interesting. It is very much from the point of view of Vera Drew, its director. And you can look at a lot of other films that have been able to connect with audiences as a result. You look at something like Hundreds of Beavers, which is not a queer film, but it's showing that there is a hungry appetite for independent film as long as people know that the film exists.
Well, this year's Oscar winner, Nora, was made on a ridiculously low budget.
Well, it also had $18 million for PR. No queer film is getting that amount of money right now. All that to say that I think the future of independent film there are answers that lie in our past, where it is, to keep creating interesting new work, to keep creating work that isn't reliant upon the approval of any kind of studio head or executive or whatever, to make things that are true to your voice and to find ways to connect with an audience. With the advent of the internet, there are a lot of tools for crowdsourcing that have created like I won't say an egalitarian model or anything, but certainly has created a more democratic one where if you can connect with your audience, that you can build that audience before you ever make your film. And so, The People's Joker certainly worked upon that. Vera had been working in comedy circles for years. I think there had been a crowdfunding campaign through Kickstarter to crowdfund the film. And so before the film was ever released, there was an audience that was waiting for this film to come out. With the festival circuit, you can continue to build audiences for your film. You're utilizing what curators locally have been able to build for their audiences and then put your film and to build your audience off of those audiences. We can't predict what the future of queer film will be as a whole because queer film is not a monolithic kind of thing. But I am excited to see what the future is, where we're not trying to cater to a studio presence, a network presence, a streaming presence, where we can take films directly to audiences. We can prioritize theatrical exhibition. We can prioritize non-traditional exhibition and see what really can be possible in terms of making an impact with our films.
Are you one of these people who are like, oh, everything's gone to hell and movies were so much better when?
Well, as somebody who cannot position himself as a proper film historian, I'm hesitant to answer that question with any kind of definitive, statement based off of.
So I can get the answer that I want. Is there an era of film that you turn towards? I would say today.
There are so many incredible contemporary films that are being made. There are also a lot of bad ones being made, but I don't see how that's different than any other kind of recent era of filmmaking. I think there are people that are trying to make films for the lowest common denominator, and I think when you're trying to make a film that's for everybody, you can often make a film that is for nobody. But I think there are a lot of incredible filmmakers who are doing work nowadays that's really exciting. Some of the best films I've ever seen have come out in the last couple of years. I would say what I really enjoy watching in particular nowadays is, besides films from the 90s, which is what I, came up on and I can't get enough of because of their, specific points of view as independent filmmakers, and they're making things that feel very different for the time. I also am really gravitating towards a lot of films from the 70s right now. I watch a lot of like Columbo, and then I'll go and I'll watch, the films from these guest stars who are, in Columbo. So like Cassavetes, Jenna Rollins, are obviously, big collaborators with Peter Falk. And so, that's a nice gateway to, different cinema of the era there. And what I'm really moved by is just like the specificity of the points of view that I'm getting to watch in these different eras of filmmaking. But I'm here for it all. And even if it's a terrible film, I feel like there's something that you can learn from it in some capacity. So what I gravitate towards right now is the 70s and the 90s, but I'm sure that will change because musicals are my favorite genre, for example. So I like to watch a lot of, Busby Berkeley or, Bob Fosse or whatever. So anything that you can give me from any era of musical filmmaking, I'm generally interested in.
Yeah, I like the 70s films too. I've been watching a lot of those lately. It seemed like a really more of a free era for making films. You could actually make a movie and it could be weird and edgy and you'd still get a budget for it.
And yet you didn't like Simon of the Desert, the weirdest and edgiest film I could have shown you. I see how you are.
It's not that I didn't like it. It's that I didn't get it the first, 2 times I watched it. I understand it better now. I know. Sav, how has your opinion of Chasing Amy changed since you first watched as a kid to now? Or has it? I'm sure it has changed, but in what way? How would you describe that change?
Well, I feel like Chasing Amy kind of implicitly answers that question, which is, the idea that a thing that was so important to me at age 12 no longer requires the same reverence as an adult in many ways. And that's okay and that's natural because all of the things that that film gave me as a result of loving it, you know? Chasing Amy could never love me back the way that I loved it, but as a result of loving it, I found community, I found purpose, I found connection, I found love. And I think that that's a beautiful thing, you know, that something that fandom can be a jumping off point for something greater in our lives. But it's okay for that relationship to fandom to change. You know, I'm not as fervent about Star Wars as I was as a child when I was having lightsaber battles in the living rooms with my cousin or anything like that. But it's also okay that I can go to the movie
I'm
theater and
55
enjoy
and
it
I
now.
still have lightsaber battles with my children on a weekly basis. I'm just saying.
Well, the pugs can't hold lightsabers, so unfortunately, I'm out of options there.
Darn them and their lack of thumbs.
But you know, so I think it's okay for our relationship to things to change over time. And now I'm forever publicly tied to Chasing Amy in one way or another. But no, it's no longer my comfort movie because it was my job for, you know, 6.5 years to talk about. And it's also given way for new films to be a point of discovery instead of me having to hold on so tightly to a sense of identity that's tied specifically to one film, which is really okay with me.
Do you have a current comfort film that you'd want to talk about?
Oh gosh. You know, I don't know if I have one comfort film, but I would say like I went through a phase where The Room was my comfort film.
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
It just made me laugh my ass off all the time, and it drove Riley up a wall of my phase where I only wanted to watch that. Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar is a huge comfort film, but it's also a brilliant cinematic endeavor into comedy that I think has forever changed comedy for the better. I think Josh Greenbaum, Kristen Wiig, Annie Momolo really outdid themselves on that one. You know, in terms of like comfort watching, though, I find myself gravitating to TV for a lot of comfort watching because, you know, oftentimes when I'm watching a film nowadays, you know, I feel like I am like studying for my next film. You know, I'll go through phases where, you know, as I'm prepping for another film where, you know, watching films feels more like work than it does pleasure nowadays. And so right now I'm watching a lot of RuPaul's Drag Race. I watched a lot of The Traitors. I'm watching a lot of Columbo. Riley and I are watching The Good Wife and all of its subsequent spin-offs right now. I love a good TV procedural. That's something that brings me comfort in some weird way. Maybe it's the idea that there is a rhyme and reason to Law and Order in this country. Maybe that's the fantasy for me.
Yeah, it'd be nice if things were as easy as in.
I haven't been paying attention to the news since 2016. Did something bad happen?
I wish I could not pay attention to the news, but I don't have a choice. And I think a lot of people are in that boat.
Indeed. You know, I think through examining popular culture, there's a lot that we reveal about ourselves. There are, I think, a handful of watershed moments in pop culture that I'm interested in examining through the documentary form. You know, I'm open to doing other forms of documentary, but I continuously find myself drawn to what does our collective reaction to a specific moment in time say about us as people, and how does that reveal our humanity for good or for, you know, bad, to put it in simplistic terms. And so yeah, I've got some ideas for other documentaries that I'm, you know, actively pursuing or starting to write treatments for. You know, I think there are some forms of documentary that are better suited for YouTube than they are for a movie theater, for example. But the biggest and most important thing for me is for the work to connect with an audience in whatever way is most effective. And so I have some ideas, but some of the best documentary work that I've ever, you know, that I've seen in you know, a contemporary sense is from Defunct Land, which is on YouTube. You know, the history of Fast Pass. You know, I never thought that I would be drawn into a documentary about something so specific, but that really said a lot about, you know, capitalism, right? So I think the work that Kevin Perjurer and his team over there are doing is phenomenal, and I'm always exploring other avenues of how to tell the best possible story.
I grew up in Kansas City. There are no big resorts or beachside amusement parks. To be honest, nothing is in Kansas. There's a good amount of wheat, prairie, livestock, a surprising lack of buffalo despite the song, In fact, I've never even seen one, and if I did, it would technically be a bison. There's cornfields and windmills and weather vanes and an occasional tornado. You've seen the first 20 minutes of The Wizard of Oz. It's basically that. While my few vacations to Disneyland and Walt Disney World were what initially sparked my
Defunctland
interest
is
in
so
theme
good.
parks.
I love that channel.
A fellow Kansas Cityan, which is great.
Yeah, he even did an episode about the Orient Express. That was like, I had to show that to my kid because he didn't know how important that roller coaster was to us back in the day.
Yeah, it was my favorite roller coaster growing up.
It was great.
Goddamn Jayhawks blew my entire bracket in the NCAA.
Oh, yeah?
2 days ago. Yeah, well, they were number 7 seed, and I had them as my upset pick, facing Michigan State in the Final Four, and they lost in the first round. And I'm not happy with that.
I am not happy with that either. I think I watched last year, and there was a lot of yelling at the TV where I'm like, what the hell? This is the winningest program in men's NCAA history, and this is how we're coming out for March Madness.
All I asked them to do was win 3 games, and they couldn't win one.
Look, all I'm ever asking for them is to win every game, and you see how that's working out for me.
Survive in advance, though. I mean, and I suppose as a 7 seed, I was putting too much pressure on them.
So here's a question straight from Chasing Amy. Have you finally watched Lord of the Rings?
I would like to use this as an opportunity to clear up some blatant disinformation and misinformation perpetuated by my beloved wife, Riley. First of all, I want to say I had seen Lord of the Rings. I just hadn't seen them since I was 8. I didn't remember who Gimli was, so that's number one. I had watched all the extended editions with my dad, and I had seen all of that. But to answer your question, yes, we have since rewatched all of the Lord of the Rings with the extended cuts, and it was very enjoyable. And I knew who Gimli was shortly after being outed as not having remembered him, and it was great. It was great. And then we tried to watch Rings of Power, and that was not for us. That's all I'll say about that.
I tried to watch it too, and I just could not get into it. I hated the Hobbit trilogy also. It's just like, why? You had this great trilogy, and then you tried to make a single book into a trilogy where it's not meant to be a trilogy.
I share that sentiment. I think it would have been a very powerful single film to do The Hobbit. If people had done it before, they could do it again.
Yeah, and I think that
Rankin and Bass did the best Hobbit. The greatest adventure is what lies ahead. Come on, you got John Huston as Gandalf. The Rankin
and you have animation that's hard to look at.
Racist, it's because it's Japanese.
What? No, I said the animation is hard to look at.
Yeah, it was Japanese animation. Well, Erin, you got anything else? Or can we kind of let Sav wrap up and get on with his life?
Yeah, I think we can go ahead and wrap up.
All right, I have one final question for you, Sav, and this is very important, so we'll give you a moment to think about it. As you have been transitioning into manhood, how often do you think about the Roman Empire?
Well, I think I have more chest hair than pretty much every man I know, so the process of transition, I think if we're talking aesthetics, I feel like I'm there. But we did start watching the Rome miniseries from the early aughts, and so that's about as much as I think about it. I will say I think a lot about Greek mythology and Roman mythology, and so I think that's my version of thinking of the Roman Empire.
Those are rookie numbers. You're going to have to work on that, but that's okay as long as you're thinking about it.
Right. No, I mean it's the Rome miniseries is more brutal than I thought it was going to be. You know, I hadn't watched it, but Riley had watched it and loved it when she was growing up. We're slowly going through that, but I'm like, I need something with a happier vibe every once in a while.
Definitely a brutal series, but I loved it. Pulo is my favorite character of like anything, except for Our Flag Means Death. But yeah, apart from Our Flag Means Death, Pulo is my favorite character.
Oh, Erin and I have the similar kind of trait. Erin calls hers autism, and I just simply call mine being awesome, where we can't just like something a little bit or normally. I thought of that when you had that shot of you as a 12-year-old watching or chasing Amy, and talking about how you watched it 30 times in a row. Thank you for normalizing that for us. It's not autism, it's just being awesome.
Oh gosh, well, I have no idea what it says about me, but I've always had a very focused string of obsessions, I guess. My mom is like this, my wife is like this. We're very much bonded by our massive love of fandom or things that kind of capture our imagination. So for me, I've always been like laser focused on the thing that I'm really into on any given time. But regardless of how your obsessions manifest, as long as it makes you happy and it's not hurting anybody else, like I'm all for it.
I agree 100%. It doesn't hurt anybody for, you to like one movie or one book series or one TV show. It's fine. And I agree about fandom. There's some amazing stuff you can get out of fandom. I've made actual friends by being an Our Flag Means Death fan. It's so weird, but people I've actually met in person and talked to and I write letters to, just because we've bonded over this one mutual interest. I think it's amazing that can happen.
Well, as adults, the primary ways that we meet people are through work and school. And if you're not, at work or school, there's only so many other ways that you can make friends. And I think fandom is a great way to do that. So whether you have a D&D group, you enjoy LARPing, you enjoy, playing Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh or Magic the Gathering, you gather in a nerd space, you enjoy the same TV show, you enjoy the same types of movies, you're in a movie club, you're in a book club, whatever. I think the most important thing is that we get out there and we connect with other people, because I think that's the shit that makes life worth living. And it's certainly the thing that makes my life better.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for being here, Sav.
Yeah, if you want to support Chasing Amy, again, watch us on Canopy, Hoopla, or go to chasingamydoc.com. We're on all the socials at chasingamydoc. And if you'd like to support my work, you can go to savrodgers.com and find ways to support me there. I'm on Instagram at savrodgersfilm. I'm also on Blue Sky at savrodgers.bluesky.social. And thanks for taking the time to listen today.
Thanks for being here. Erin, where can people find you online?
I'm mostly on Blue Sky at toadpuppy.bluesky.social.
Toad Puppy.
I'm always Toad Puppy. And that's because of pugs. I'm throwing that out there for Sav. It's because of pugs. We had a pug when I was a kid, and I called her a little Toad Puppy because of a little squishy face.
That is so accurate, and I love that.
I love pugs, so Toad Puppy everywhere.
And I'm Trommater over on the artist formerly known as Twitter. If you were listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take a minute to write us a review. And if you are listening on YouTube, click the little globe in the right-hand corner and hit subscribe. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Sav Rodgers. Thank you, Erin Brown. And we'll see you next week.
The greatest adventure is what lies ahead. Today and tomorrow are yet to be said. The chances, the changes are all yours to make. The mold of your life is in your hands to break. The greatest adventure.
You can swear, by the way. I heard you catch it. You don't have to.
All right.
I won't be bleeping. If you know Erin at all, I'm just kidding, Erin. You know I love you. Anyway.
Oh, I swear like a sailor. I know it. I swear like an educated sailor.